I don't know about you, but I could do with some of God's mercy right about now. Times are tough. This pandemic that we thought would be dealt with by a couple of week closure seems to drag on. And then we thought, the summer would be okay. And then, if we just kept things tight through Thanksgiving, Christmas would be okay. And now we know that we will continue to have to reduce our group sizes and take all of the precautions necessary all the way through Christmas and into next year. And it's hard on all of us. I don't believe it's any harder on me than it is on anybody else. But a little bit of God's mercy right about now would be good. And to compound that, I feel like since Tuesday, I've been living out Bill Murray's character of Phil Connors in Groundhog Day. You know, that movie where Phil wakes up every morning and it's the same thing over and over again. And I begin to think that every time I turn on the news and I hear that it's still election night in America. I finished writing this sermon on Friday evening and I'm recording it on Saturday. And when I woke up this morning, there was no real substantial progress in the election that was supposed to be over on Tuesday. And in the midst of this continuation of both of these things, I'm ready to appeal out to God for God's mercy on either one at this point. I would much prefer God's mercy and compassion to help us deal with the pandemic. But if it gets the news off of the American presidential election, if that's easier, I'm willing to take that one too. Life is a struggle at the moment for many of us because we feel as if things are just carrying on and repeating themselves day after day when really what we want is to be able to see some progress. Now, in today's reading, Jonah is trying to run as far away as possible. He's trying to run to Tarshish, the farthest place that he knows. And yet, in the middle of the reading, he admits that he believes in the God who created the heavens and the seas and the dry land. In other words, Jonah admits that he believes in the God who is everywhere. I am a Hebrew, Jonah replied in Jonah 1:9. I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Jonah should have known that his attempt to run away was futile. The God who made heaven and the sea and the dry land, who is everywhere, is not a God that any of us can run away from. There is no other God that we can run to for protection. There is something deeper, though. Some commentators believe that this moment, although at the beginning of the book of Jonah, is not the first time that we've heard about Jonah. We just didn't know Jonah's name at that point. This from the Lexham Bible Dictionary. Jonah's name is also sometimes held to be symbolic with son of Amittai, interpreted to mean son of truth. This interpretation is attested as far back as rabbinic literature, where the rabbis speculate that Jonah is the unnamed son of the widow of Zarephath, raised from the dead by Elijah, linking the son of Amittai with the widow's statement that Elijah's word was truth. We might have read about Jonah last week and not even known it. And if what the rabbis believe is correct, and Jonah is the unnamed son of the widow of Zarephath, then God showed compassion to Jonah and his mother through Elijah last week. And this week we hear that Jonah wants to run away from God. God had just asked Jonah to deliver a message to Nineveh, which might have expanded God's compassion and God's mercy to more people. And instead of being willing to go and witness to that mercy and compassion that Jonah had already received, he tries to run away. Rather than living out his call to be a prophet, he decides that he wants to go in a different direction. Now, granted, what God asked Jonah to do was difficult. To go into the midst of a people that believed a different God, to go into the midst of a people that his people, Jonah's people, thought were evil, is not an easy task. And yet, although Jonah already knew God's mercy and God's compassion, it wasn't enough for him to begin with, and he decided he needed to run away. In the end of today's reading, we get to the real point of the story. It is actually the last couple of verses of the book of Jonah. The book of Jonah is very short. Then the Lord said, "You are concerned about the bush, for which you did not labor and for which you did not grow. It came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I, the Lord, not be concerned with Nineveh, that great city, in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals?" Jonah was caught up in the midst of his own concerns. In the midst of concerns for his own safety and well-being, which are important concerns, don't get me wrong. But he used those concerns to stop the sharing of God's mercy and compassion. I started out complaining about how long this pandemic has gone on. And I'm sure that I could not find a person who would want it to carry on, who does not wish that it was over. However, my griping about the pandemic, about people who wear masks and don't wear masks and wear them improperly and all of those things, if that causes me to not see God's compassion and mercy in the world, then I'm missing something. If that causes me to not be God's compassion and mercy in the world, then I'm missing something. Then I've run from God's message just as much as Jonah did. There are times in our lives when we all think things will never end. And as we continue through this pandemic time, we may need to be reminded to be compassionate, to be merciful, particularly to people who at times we think don't really deserve it. For they too were created by our God. They too are offered the same gifts of compassion and mercy by our God. For that compassion and mercy that is offered to us and to all of God's world, we give thanks for today. Amen.